This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And that Barcelona terrorist attack, van attack that killed the alleged Islamic terrorists, an attack that ISIS has claimed credit for, killed 13 people, wounded more than 100. I think as many as 10 are gravely injured. So
yeah, and they're people from, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Barcelona, but people come from all over the world, and 20 people from 24 different countries were either killed or injured in that gruesome attack yesterday.
3 in custody, 2 Moroccans and 1 Spanish national, but the driver not in custody. His brother is, he's not. And this is the 6th such attack committed by Islamofascists in Europe in just this calendar year.
Yeah, we've had attacks in Stockholm, London, and of course the worst one was in Nice, France.
What's to be done about it? What does it say about the virulence of ISIS, and also the coverage of this? I go back to CNN. The suggestion that Wolf Blitzer made that this could have been a copycat attack of Charlottesville. Let's bring in our friend Jeff Addicott. He is Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Addicott, I should say, director of the Center for Terrorism Law, former Army officer in the JAG Corps as well. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure.
So, we haven't seen an attack on this scale in Spain since the bombings in Madrid back in March of 2004. But the reporting strikes a very similar profile. I'm talking of a country and a major city like Barcelona, areas that were essentially no-go zones. That wasn't used, but that were segregated Muslim majority neighborhoods where the police and Barcelona authorities knew there was that those neighborhoods were serving as incubators of extremist activity. And again, it takes something like this before you get a response to policies that were pursued that ultimately allowed for this kind of hate and violence to incubate.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, there's actually, of course, there's 2 attacks in Spain. The second one at 1 o'clock in the morning, their time. I'm in London right now, and in that incident, we had 4 or 5 terrorists that were killed, these Islamic extremists. And so we had at least 2 cells that were operating, one in Barcelona and one, about 100 kilometers to the south. So it's this attack, they call it a low-tech attack. It doesn't require a lot of skill. It doesn't require training. You don't need to go to a Al-Qaeda training terror camp to learn how to do combat activities. You simply get in the larger the truck, the better. And of course, we saw this in Germany, where you had the Christmas, market attack, where someone just got in a bus and started, or a large vehicle, and started driving through. In this particular attack, they were weaving back and forth along the sidewalks to mow down as many people. That's a very crowded area, so they selected it for maximum casualties. There's nowhere to go. If you're in that particular area, there's nowhere for you to run because you're jammed in on either side. It's a low-tech attack, and these Islamists are the ones that have perfected this. If other people have, copycatted it, they copycatted it from Islam. It's radical Islam, of course. As the Prime Minister of Spain said, these are jihadists. And it's always important to remember that the vast majority of Muslims have nothing to do with this. In London, here, I walked through a neighborhood just the other day. I'm looking out the window. I see several, women dressed up in the traditional garb. They have nothing to do with these types of things. But there are an element inside of the of Islam that we call radical Islam that have everything to do with it. And that's the problem for the police, is separating those people out from the majority. And obviously, we need more assistance from the majority communities to to be the eyes and the ears for the police and say, something's going on in the community in this particular apartment building, because somebody knows who these people are within the community. And we've seen this phenomenon in our own country, in California, where people know something strange going on, but they don't want to become involved. And that's basically human nature, whether you're, whatever religious background you have, you just don't want to get involved.
Yeah, you can't hide your head in the sand anymore in these days. But why Spain? I mean, they haven't had an attack in 13 years. Do you know why they chose?
Well, yeah. Well, they have a different system than we do in our country in terms of security and tracking terror groups. They've broken up a lot of plots in Germany and France and England and Spain, all across Europe. They don't have our Bill of Rights. In London, again, I'm in London this week doing terrorism studies. You've got cameras on every single street corner, so they have amplified their domestic security laws, where they can detain suspects for lengthy periods of time, approximately a month, while they investigate them. In our country, we haven't done that. We haven't amplified our domestic law to, in response to jihad attacks. We've used the law of war for jihadists overseas, but within our country, we still apply our own domestic criminal law. In Europe, many countries have modified their domestic criminal law to deal with the threat. So they've been very good at breaking up numerous plots over the years. But it just takes, one or two times that the information is not there and the attack goes through. And with these low-tech attacks, much harder to track because they're not, they don't have to go to training schools. There's not much communication that has to be done other than I'm going to rent a van and you and I are going to, drive it into a large population area.
So Paris, Brussels, London, Madrid, Barcelona, Stockholm, Nice, the list goes on and on and on. And I wonder, now we're 16 years after 9/11, what the threat assessment is of ISIS and radical Islamic terrorism and terrorists in all forms in Europe in terms of the ability of these cities to ever rid themselves of these internal problems they have. I'll just ask that question. I've got a follow-up, but that question first.
I think they're going to do it in the long term as these populations assimilate into the Western culture. I think you're going to see much improvement, and that's a gradual process. And that's what we demand in our country, that if you come here, you assimilate into our Bill of Rights and the way that we do things. And that's been the melting pot that's made this a great country, although we've had our 9/11, our Orlando, our San Bernardino.
Yeah.
We've had jihadi attacks here as well. But again, when will it end? Never. I mean, there's always crime. There's always another war. There's always a need for law enforcement. We have to be vigilant. This is the evil of our day, is jihad and these jihadists. I'm hopeful, however, that we can turn the corner once ISIS is thoroughly crushed. We've liberated millions of people already in Syria and Iraq from the clutches of this evil caliphate. And once we crush it entirely, I think you're going to see the wind go out of the sails of many of these individuals. ISIS, of course, has taken responsibility for the attacks here in Spain. I think that's going to be a major blow to the organization and the people that pledge allegiance to this type of ideology of hate and violence.
You mentioned these European countries are not restrained by our Bill of Rights when it comes to law enforcement, our Constitution when it comes to law enforcement. And yet we have had attacks on American soil. They've soft targets, kind of down market, if you will, communities, just in terms of size and presence and and global importance. When does something like this manifest itself in New York or Chicago or L.A. or Boston, like it is in Europe, in European capitals and major cities?
Well, yeah, Israel and the United States are the number one and two great evils according to their ideology of hate. And we've had the biggest attack that's ever occurred, which is, of course, 9/11. And ISIS has made it very clear they want to top a 9/11 type event in our country. But we've been very vigilant. Our law enforcement has done an excellent job, and so that hasn't occurred yet. We've had smaller attacks by individuals that are inspired by ISIS Central Command, but we haven't had a major attack since 9/11, and I'm hopeful that we won't. It's very important that we not allow weapons of mass destruction to fall into the hands of these jihadists or other regimes like Iran that basically have every year they have a Death to America march in the Capitol, and that's kind of a clue that they want to destroy you. So it's a very tough job, and there's a lot of parameters. But I think one thing all of us need to remind ourselves, and I see that here in Europe, is that these jihadists, these terrorists, are not changing the way of life of most people. They go right back out in the streets. They do what the Israelis do. They're not letting terror grip their lives in such a way that they're paralyzed, or that they're throwing their own traditions into the traditions of openness and inclusiveness into the trash can.
Well, some breaking news. We've just learned that a 14th person has died in the Barcelona rampage, and that the 5 terrorists that were taken down in that second vehicle attack, they're all wearing fake suicide belts. But what is their relation to this house bomb that happened the night before the Barcelona attack?
Yeah, we're still trying to sort that out. That could mean perhaps they had another plan in mind, and that included an explosive device. And then when that probably may have went off by accident or something, that they decided to go to plan B, which was to take the van and run down as many people as they could. So apparently they were planning a rather high-tech attack coupled with a low-tech attack. And when the high-tech attack, and this is my own personal opinion, when the high-tech attack didn't occur, as evidenced by something going wrong, they decided to switch immediately to the low-tech attack of the van.
Just going back to what you said before about when we eradicate ISIS and the land that they control, that could be a death knell, or certainly an event that seriously marginalizes Islamofascists globally. So I get that, because then you don't have the inspiration of the caliphate being extended, and it's we're on the march, sort of the global message that they can send through their propaganda channels. But don't you just disperse them as well? And don't you still have these kind of self-radicalized and small group cells that we've seen in many of these attacks?
Yeah, I mean, what caused these attacks to really spark and rise and develop since 2013, 2014, 2015 was the rise of ISIS. So as you can draw a direct line, as ISIS got more powerful and they defeated the Syrian and the Iraqi militaries and took control, then people, jihadists around the world, said, "Oh, well, God must be on their side." So the inverse logic applies, that when you destroy them, then their inspiration goes away. So yes, you can still have these hateful ideas, but you don't carry them out. You simply keep them in your own mind, because you're no longer inspired to carry out the violence. And that's my hope. And then, the next generation, when these people die out, that we can, in the long term, we've got to close down the Hitler Youth Camps and teach people this hate and this wicked ideology. And in the short term, we have to be vigilant, use our military over there to destroy those targets, and then law enforcement here, to confront these people. But you have to be more aggressive, I think, as the French are doing right now. If you've got a radical mosque that's preaching violence and murder, that mosque needs to be closed down. I mean, that's what the French have done in many, many cases across France. They've discovered that, we can no longer stick our head in the sand and just say, well, maybe they don't mean it, maybe they'll go away. You've got to close down the preachers of hate.
He is Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Addicott, Director of the Center for Terrorism Law, former Army officer in the JAG Corps. Lieutenant Colonel Addicott, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is The Morning Show.